Welcome to Immigration Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Afghans in Pakistan waiting for resettlement in Canada have been detained and deported. Republicans demand immigration reform be included in national security package. Evacuations from Gaza to Egypt suspended on Friday. Sources: illegal migration is pushing Europe to the brink, and it isn't racist to say so. Humza Yousaf accused of overestimating number of Ukrainian refugees living in Scotland. Afghans in Pakistan waiting for resettlement in Canada have been detained and deported. The Globe and Mail. Afghans waiting to be resettled in Canada have been among the thousands rounded up, detained and deported from Pakistan, according to Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, IRCC. Pakistani officials began mass deportations of Afghans living illegally in the country, stating that they had until November 1 to leave. The UN Convention Against Torture and International Law Principle of Non-Refoulement, which states that people should not be forced to return to countries where they face the risk of torture or persecution, have been violated, according to Human Rights Watch. Republicans demand immigration reform be included in national security package. Yahoo! Senate Republicans are demanding immigration reform be part of any larger security package. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says border reform is a sticking point for his party. Many Democrats say they'd also love to pass legislation to address immigration policies, but they're skeptical of Republican plans. Evacuations from Gaza to Egypt suspended on Friday. Sources: Reuters. Evacuations from the Gaza Strip into Egypt have been suspended due to difficulties in bringing medical evacuees to the Rafah border crossing. Limited evacuations had begun on November 1, but were paused twice in the past week due to bombardments that targeted medical convoys. Several dozen foreign passport holders and medical evacuees had entered Egypt before the suspension. On other days, several hundred foreign passport holders, dual nationals, and dependents had been crossing. Illegal migration is pushing Europe to the brink, and it isn't racist to say so. Telegraph. The UK Supreme Court is set to rule on whether the government's plan to deport migrants to Rwanda is lawful. The Home Office has challenged a Court of Appeal ruling that declared the arrangement unlawful. If the Home Office wins, the first deportation flights to Rwanda could begin as early as the new year. The Rwanda scheme has caused controversy, with dissenting voices claiming that the policy is inhumane. However, European governments are increasingly adopting similar measures. Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, has signed a deal to process asylum applications in Albania, while Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz has announced a clampdown on illegal immigration. Germany has proposed reducing asylum claim processing times and has suggested setting up asylum processing centers outside of the EU. Austria is consulting with the UK on how to establish a similar scheme, while France is pursuing a crackdown on immigration. This trend is partly due to the rise of right-wing parties. Mass migration poses significant challenges to housing, public services, and infrastructure, and threatens national and cultural identity. Humza Yousaf accused of overestimating number of Ukrainian refugees living in Scotland. Telegraph. Scottish Liberal Democrat leader Alex Cole-Hamilton has called on Scottish Government Minister Humza Yousaf to clarify the number of Ukrainian refugees living in Scotland, after accusing him of overestimating the figure. Official figures suggest that thousands of those who originally arrived in Scotland from Ukraine have since moved elsewhere in the UK. The Scottish government has admitted that the movements of Ukrainian refugees within the UK are not monitored. Braverman forces Sunak to reckon with pact that made him premier. Bloomberg. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is facing a dilemma over whether to fire his Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Braverman has consistently said what she thinks, often alienating more moderate voices that Sunak needs on side. The pair have much in common, but Braverman's power base is different and forged on attack lines. Braverman has accused London's Metropolitan Police of political bias, defying Sunak's attempts to draw a line under the dispute over a recent pro-Palestinian protest. Sunak's aides have spoken of her purpose in mollifying right-wing Tories, but she has also undermined Sunak and may be in a powerful position to challenge his authority. Germany's stifling of pro-Palestinian voices pits historical guilt against free speech. New York Times. Germany's restrictions on pro-Palestinian protests since Hamas's attacks on Israel in early October have raised concerns about the violation of civil liberties. Some countries such as Austria, Hungary and Switzerland banned pro-Palestinian protests altogether. In France, pro-Palestinian demonstrations can still be banned case by case. In Germany, debates around this issue have raised questions about the country's values and free speech. German officials have defended these restrictions on the grounds of the country's severe restrictions on criticism of Israel as a necessary part of atoning for the Holocaust. However, many in Germany's immigrant communities and progressive Jews and Israelis have said that these restrictions violate free speech and are discriminatory. In recent weeks, the police in Berlin have banned over half of the 41 scheduled Gaza solidarity protests, sometimes on the grounds that they could emotionalize residents of Palestinian origin. The Berlin police prohibited the protests based on an imminent danger that the gatherings would lead to incitement to hatred, anti-Semitic statements, glorification of violence, incitement to violence and thus to intimidation and violence, a spokeswoman said. Deadly fire in Africa's richest city exposed a secret in plain sight. New York Times. A New York Times investigation has uncovered the reasons behind the dilapidation of downtown Johannesburg, revealing an entrenched problem that has turned the area into a blighted tinderbox. Multiple governments and political parties have ignored the problem for decades, with the city's property management agency, the Johannesburg Property Company, being insolvent despite holding thousands of properties. The agency does not have an audited list of its holdings, and some low-level municipal officials have been illegally collecting rent from squatters. Meanwhile, private landlords have deserted their buildings, leaving them to be occupied by armed men, desperate families, and opportunistic squatters. The investigation found that the city government, along with the property agency and the mayor's office, have failed to even catalog the dilapidated buildings, let alone take steps to address the issues. The cause of a recent fire at a government property in downtown Johannesburg remains unknown, but the buildings are so dangerous that another tragedy seems inevitable. Fires have already broken out in other dilapidated buildings, leaving dozens of people homeless. Despite this, officials have blamed immigrants and progressive housing laws for the problem, rather than taking responsibility for their own failures. The Johannesburg Property Company, which is responsible for leasing and maintaining nearly 30,000 city properties, has become delinquent itself. The agency is insolvent despite receiving municipal and provincial subsidies, and it resists scrutiny of its lease agreements. Former board members have described a culture of intimidation and retribution within the agency, and allegations of corruption have been made against its chief executive, Helen Boats. The agency has failed to fix properties that it owns, such as the building at 80 Albert Street, which was visited by officials in 2019 but never repaired. Bipartisan group of senators working to forge border security deal. Yahoo! A bipartisan group of senators is working through the weekend to forge a deal on asylum policy changes designed to reduce migrant crossings along the southern border, hoping to make a rare breakthrough on one of Congress's most intractable issues, 3 congressional officials told CBS News. Aspinall admits he's scared ahead of UFC title fight. The Independent. Tom Aspinall has expressed his fear ahead of his upcoming fight against Sergey Pavlovich at UFC 295. The heavyweights will face off at Madison Square Garden in New York for the interim UFC heavyweight championship. Aspinall, returning from a year-long injury layoff, had originally been scheduled to face Pavlovich in September 2021, but the Russian had to withdraw due to visa issues. Since then, Pavlovich has established himself as a top heavyweight with 4 consecutive knockout victories. Aspinall acknowledges his apprehension but is embracing his underdog status and believes fear gives him a superpower in the fight. He compares himself to the honey badger, a fierce mammal known for its ferocity in the face of larger predators. Aspinall hopes to become the 3rd British fighter to win a UFC championship, following in the footsteps of Leon Edwards and Michael Bisping. Despite having only 17 days' notice for the fight, he is confident in his preparation and believes he can perform under pressure. Dear viewers, I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the 6-dimensional world, here to bring you the latest news from across dimensions. Let's dive right into it. In Afghanistan and Pakistan, the situation for Afghan refugees is dire. Many who were waiting to be resettled in Canada have been detained and deported from Pakistan, violating international laws and human rights. Meanwhile, Republicans in the U.S. are demanding that immigration reform be included in the national security package, adding another layer of complexity to an already contentious issue. In the Middle East, evacuations from Gaza to Egypt have been suspended due to ongoing conflicts and difficulties in ensuring the safety of those being evacuated. This has left many vulnerable individuals stranded and in need of assistance. On a related note, the issue of illegal migration is causing tensions in Europe, with several countries implementing stricter measures and processing asylum applications outside of the EU. This is a complex issue that touches on national identity and the strain on public services. Moving on to Scotland, there is controversy surrounding the number of Ukrainian refugees living in the country. Scottish Government Minister Humza Yousaf has been accused of overestimating the figure, raising questions about the accuracy of official statistics and the monitoring of refugee movements within the UK. In the UK, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is facing a dilemma over whether to fire his Home Secretary, Sala Braverman. Braverman has been outspoken and has challenged Sunak's attempts to draw a line under disputes. This highlights the delicate balance of power within the government and the challenges of managing different factions and opinions. In Germany, restrictions on pro-Palestinian protests have sparked a debate about free speech and the country's historical guilt. While some argue that these restrictions are necessary to prevent hate speech and violence, others claim that they violate civil liberties and discriminate against certain communities. This is a complex issue that requires a careful balance between upholding democratic values and addressing historical sensitivities. Shifting gears to Africa, a recent investigation by the New York Times has revealed the dilapidation of downtown Johannesburg and the failure of multiple governments to address the issue. The city's property management agency is insolvent and has not properly maintained its properties, leaving them occupied by squatters and posing a significant safety risk. This highlights the need for effective governance and accountability in addressing urban decay. Lastly, in the world of sports, Tom Aspinall, a British fighter, has expressed his fear ahead of his upcoming UFC title fight. Despite the apprehension, he embraces his underdog status and compares himself to a honey badger, ready to take on any challenge. It's a reminder that even in the face of fear, determination and resilience can lead to great accomplishments. That's all for today's news. Remember, these are just brief summaries of the stories, and there is much more to explore and discuss. I invite you, my esteemed viewers, to share your thoughts and questions. What are your ideas on these latest developments? Let's engage in a lively discussion. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the dimensions of news. Dr. Six. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.